Many people would have heard the expression "Sweet Fanny Adams," but few know of its origin, and there was a time when it would have been recognised instantly, and that it was connected to a brutal abduction and the murder of an 8-year-old child in Hampshire in 1867. Her murder was extraordinarily brutal and created a wave of horror and revulsion around the country, making sensational headlines. Her body had been brutally attacked and crudely dismembered, most of the parts being found in a hop field near her home. She was born on the 30th of April 1859, and the locally rooted family lived in Tanhouse Lane on the north side of Alton, a small market town in Hampshire, with her parents and 5 siblings. Fanny was known as an intelligent child, and for her lively and cheerful nature. Her best friend, Minnie Warner, was the same age and lived next door. The tranquil town was well known for its plentiful supply of hops, which led to many breweries opening and making hop picking an integral part of its economy. The Saturday afternoon of the 24th of August 1867 was a sunny and hot day. Fanny, her sister Lizzie and best friend Minnie asked if they could go out and play in the nearby field called Flood Meadow. Mrs. Adams, having no objections and being pleased for the girls to leave her while she was getting on with the housework, agreed. Fanny and the local children had often played in Flood Meadow, being around 400 yards from Tanhouse Lane. As the girls were walking towards Flood Meadow, and into a hop field, they were approached by a man dressed in a black frock coat, light waistcoat and trousers. Despite his respectable appearance, he had obviously been drinking. The proposition he put to the children remains chillingly familiar. He was Frederick Baker, a 29-year-old solicitor's clerk. He had moved about a year earlier from Guildford to work and live in Alton. He was employed by solicitor Mr. Clements, whose office was situated on the High Street, opposite the Swan Hotel, a pub which Baker often frequented. The girls had seen Baker before at church meetings and were unconcerned about taking money from him. Baker watched them run up and down as they played and ate the blackberries he had picked for them. He offered Minnie 3 halfpennies to go off and spend on sweets with Lizzie, while Fanny could have a halfpenny if she alone would accompany him up the Hollow, an old road leading to the nearby village of Shalden. Fanny took a halfpenny, but correctly refused to go with him. He picked her up and carried her into a nearby hop field, out of sight of the other children. It was then around 1:30 p.m. At about 5 o'clock, having played together since Fanny's abduction, Minnie Warner and Lizzie Adams made their way home. Seeing them return, a neighbour, Mrs. Gardner, asked where Fanny was, then rushed to tell Mrs. Adams when the children had explained what had happened. The anxious women hurried up the lane, where they met a man coming from the direction of the Hollow. It was Baker, leaning on a gate separating the hop field and Flood Meadow. "What have you done with the child?" "Nothing," he replied, maintaining his composure as he answered Mrs. Gardner's other questions. Yes, he had given them money, but only to buy sweets, which I often do for children, and Fanny, unharmed, had left him to rejoin the others. His air of respectability impressed the women, and when he told them he was the clerk of a local solicitor, William Clement, they allowed him to leave. By 7 o'clock, with Fanny still missing, prompting Mrs. Adams and a group of neighbours to search for the missing child, believing that she was still playing in one of the fields. As the evening was drawing in, the group began the search in the Hollow, with no success. In the nearby hop field, labourer Thomas Gates found the grim discovery of Fanny's head stuck on 2 hop poles while he was tending to the crops. The search party found other parts of Fanny's dreadfully mutilated remains scattered around the field. Her ear had been severed from the head, which had 2 large cuts from mouth to ear. Further investigation discovered the other remains of the child. The head, arms and legs had been separated from the rest of the body. There were 3 incisions on the left side of the chest and a deep cut on the left arm, dividing her muscles. Her forearm was cut off at the elbow joint, and her left leg nearly severed at the hip, with her left foot cut off at the ankle. Her right leg was torn from the body, and the whole contents of her pelvis and chest were completely removed. 5 further incisions had been made on the liver. Her heart had been cut out. Both of her eyes had been removed and found next to the nearby River Wey. Overwhelmed with grief, Mrs. Adams collapsed on her way to tell her husband George, who was playing cricket at the time. When he was told the details, he returned home to get his loaded shotgun and set out to look for the culprit. But neighbours stopped him and instead sat with him through the night. The next day, hundreds of people visited the hop field to help collect Fanny's scattered remains. The police tried, unsuccessfully, to find the murder weapon or weapons, as they suspected that small knives were used to commit the crime. It is possible that the crowd of searchers had inadvertently trampled any clues into the ground. They did recover all of Fanny's cut clothing, scattered across the field, except for her hat. Most of her body parts were collected that day, but an arm, foot and intestines were not found until the next morning. 1 foot was still in a shoe, and still clutched in one hand was the halfpenny that Baker had given to Fanny. The breastbone was never found. Her remains were taken to the doctor's surgery, located in Amory Street, for a post-mortem to be carried out. There, Fanny's body parts were sewn together, and Hampshire constabulary officers took them to the local police station. A stone that had flesh and hair sticking to it was handed to the police as evidence, as they thought it may have been the actual murder weapon. That evening, Police Superintendent William Cheney hurried from the police station to Flood Meadow, and, with the help of some of his officers, Cheney organised a search to trace the other missing body parts. Hearing that Baker had been seen with the children before Fanny's disappearance, he retraced his steps through the town, arriving at the solicitor's office at 9 p.m. He found Baker still at work, an hour later than usual. Baker protested, claiming his innocence despite being informed he was the only suspect. "I know nothing about it," said Baker, in the first of many protestations of innocence. Cheney had no alternative to arrest Baker on suspicion of murder. By this time, a large and agitated crowd had gathered outside the solicitor's office, forcing the police to smuggle Baker out the back door for fear that the mob would kill him. The following Monday, while searching Baker's office desk, Cheney found his diary. It contained a damning entry which the suspect admitted writing shortly before his arrest. 24th of August, Saturday. Killed a young girl. It was fine and hot. At his trial, Baker maintained that this entry, written when he was drunk, simply meant he was aware a girl had been murdered. Witnesses confirmed that he had left the office shortly after 1 p.m, returning at 3:25 p.m. He again went out until 5:30 in the afternoon. Mrs. Gardner and Mrs. Adams had seen him coming from the direction of the hop field sometime after 5 o'clock. If, as seems likely, he had killed Fanny Adams during his first absence, had he returned to commit further depredations on his victim's body? Baker's fellow clerk, Morris Biddle, spoke of seeing him in the office at about 6 that evening, when he had described his meeting with Mrs. Adams and Mrs. Gardner. Baker had seemed disturbed. "It would be very awkward for me if the child is murdered," he told Biddle. Later they went over to the Swan for a drink, where the morose Baker said he might leave town the following Monday. To his colleague's observation that perhaps he would have difficulty in finding a new job, Baker made the significant reply, "I could go as a butcher." When searched at the police station, the wristbands of Baker's shirt and his trousers were spotted with blood. His boots, socks and trouser bottoms were wet. "That won't hang me, will it?" he said nonchalantly, explaining that it was his habit to step into water when out walking, but he could not explain how his clothing became blood-stained. More evidence, 2 small knives, one of them stained with blood, came to light when he was searched. After being questioned about his appearance, Baker responded, "Well, I don't see a scratch or cut on my hands to account for the blood." His conduct during this interrogation was described as cool and collected. The local newspaper reported that the hop field had been cleared on the 21st of September, but nothing connected with the murder had been found. It also added that Baker remained completely unmoved by the killing and did not exhibit any symptoms of insanity or remorse. Further confusion was added when he said that he was intoxicated after seeing the children. Baker was transferred to Winchester Prison on the 19th of October. Subsequent investigations by Hampshire police continued until the end of October. One thing that came to light was a boy whose parents lived close to the Adams family home came forward as an eyewitness. The boy said he saw Baker emerge from the hop field at about 2 p.m. on the day Fanny was murdered, with his hands and clothes saturated with blood. Baker then apparently walked down to the river and calmly wiped himself with a handkerchief, after which he put a small knife and another unidentified object into his jacket pocket. The boy had related this story to his mother, but she had not told anyone until she spoke about it in a pub 2 months later. The police searched the whole area for 2 weeks, but no other weapons were found. Cheney requested immediate forensic tests in late October. All the recovered clothing and the 2 knives taken from Baker at the time of his arrest were sent to Professor A.S. Taylor at Guy's Hospital in London, where they underwent the most detailed tests possible at the time. After examining the items over the coming weeks, Taylor was able to confirm that the blood on the knives was human. One of them contained a small amount of coagulated blood, although none was on the handle. Under cross-examination, Taylor stated that he would have expected more blood on the knives and signs of rust if they had been washed. The quantity of blood found was surprisingly small. Taylor suggested that an inexperienced person armed with a proper weapon could dismember a body in about half an hour. Blood would still run, but would not have spurted from the body. Further examination of Baker's clothes uncovered small traces of diluted blood on his waistcoat, trousers and socks. The wristbands of his shirt had been folded back, and diluted blood stained the folds. Dr. Lewis Leslie from Alton thought Fanny's ultimate cause of death was probably by a blow to the head with a stone. He speculated that a larger instrument had to have been used to cut the body, and also added that dismemberment was achieved in less than an hour. Forensics indicated that cuts had been made when the body was still warm, and that Fanny had not only been cut, but also hacked and torn to pieces. The time it had taken Baker to cut the body into so many pieces most likely allowed him to choose his positioning so that he might not necessarily be covered in blood. The forensic staff in London concluded that the small knives found in Baker's possession would not have been capable of severing parts of the victim's body, so another weapon had to have been used. In Winchester Prison, Baker was talkative to the wardens, especially the chaplain. He still insisted that his conscience was clear concerning the murder, and wondered who the guilty party was, hoping that he would be found. He ate and slept well, which was in contrast to his time in Alton's prison, where he is said disturbed in his sleep and physically shuddered at the sight of meat. English law at the time required that in the case of a sudden death, an immediate inquest had to be held under the jurisdiction of a coroner. In the case of Fanny Adams, Deputy County Coroner Robert Harfield was in charge of the proceedings, which were held at the Duke's Head Inn in Alton on the 27th of August. Cheney and Acting Chief Constable Everett, who represented Hampshire Constabulary, were in attendance. The first to give evidence was Minnie Warner, who told the jury that Baker had given her money to run down the hollow with Fanny and into a nearby field, while he picked blackberries for them. She was unable to identify Baker, but correctly described what he was wearing when he murdered Fanny. The next to testify was Fanny's mother, who recalled that she met Baker at a gate to the hop field. Minnie identified Baker as the man who gave her the pennies there. Baker contradicted Minnie by saying, "No, 3 halfpence." Mrs. Gardner, who had accompanied Fanny's mother to search for the missing girl, gave evidence next. She was able to identify Baker and told the jury that he appeared to be very relaxed at the time she saw him. Mrs. Gardner then said she should give him up to the police, adding, "The reason why I speak so is that a gentleman had been giving halfpennies to the children for no good purpose, and I thought your actions were odd." After being asked again about Fanny's whereabouts, Baker said he had left her at the gate to play. A local painter and decorator, William Walker, had found the large stone in the hop field, with blood, long hair, and a small piece of flesh adhering to it. This, said Dr. Leslie, the Alton Divisional Police Surgeon, was probably the murder weapon. His post-mortem finding was that death had been caused by a crushing blow to Fanny's head. Tuesday evening saw the inquest before Deputy County Coroner Rupert Harfield commence at the Duke's Head Inn. After viewing the gruesome remains, hearing the evidence and the handcuffed prisoner's reply when the coroner asked if he wished to say anything, to which he replied, "No, sir, only that I am innocent," the jury returned a verdict wilful murder against Frederick Baker for killing Fanny Adams. He was remanded to Winchester Prison to await the formal committal hearing. This was held at Alton Town Hall on Thursday the 29th of August, before local magistrates. Still protesting his innocence, the prisoner was committed for trial at the next county assizes and sent to Winchester Prison to await trial. A large crowd awaited his removal from the town hall, and the police were only able to protect him from the violence of the mob with great difficulty. The trial took place at Winchester on the 5th of December. The defence contested Minnie's identification of Baker and claimed the knives found were too small for the crime. They also argued insanity, as Baker's father had been violent, a cousin had been in asylums, his sister had died of a brain fever, and he had attempted suicide after a love affair. The defence also argued that the diary entry was typical of the formal way of entry that the defendant used, and that the absence of a comma after the word "killed" did not render the entry a confession. Justice Mellor invited the jury to consider a verdict of not responsible because of insanity, but instead they returned a guilty verdict after just 15 minutes of deliberations. On the 24th of December, Baker was hanged outside Winchester Prison. The crime had become notorious, and a crowd of around 5,000 people, mostly women, attended the execution. Before his death, it became known that Baker had written to the parents of the murdered child to express deep sorrow over the crime that he had committed, in an unguarded hour and not with malice aforethought. He earnestly sought their forgiveness, adding that he had been enraged at her crying, but it was done without any pain or struggle. The prisoner denied most emphatically that he had violated the child or had attempted to do so. In 1869, new rations of tinned mutton were introduced for British seamen. They were unimpressed by it and suggested it might be the butchered remains of Fanny Adams. It became slang for mediocre mutton, stew, scarce leftovers, and then anything worthless. Gradually accepted throughout the armed services as a euphemism for a sweet nothing, it passed into common usage. By the mid-20th century, many people were pretending that their favourite expression, sweet F.A., actually stood for Sweet Fanny Adams, with its commonplace meaning of total inaction or nothingness, while they and their peers that expression among themselves as an expletive. And so, Sweet Fanny Adams has long lingered as that euphemism.